U.S. Modernist Radio is part of DesignNetwork.org, exclusive architecture and design podcasts reaching creative listeners worldwide.
Hi, this is Steffi Orazzi. I'm the author of Modernist Escapes, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Like the Holy Grail or Colonel Sanders' 11 Herbs and Spices, people have been searching for the secret to successful prefabricated houses for nearly 100 years. What could possibly be better than reasonably priced, mostly factory-built house parts assembled on your land in a matter of days or weeks, not months? The promise of well-designed houses fast and cheap turns out to be not so easy or popular with a public that still prefers developer tract houses. Joining us today is Professor Avi Friedman, author of the new book Prefab Living, and Allison Arieff, founding editor at Dwell and author of the 2002 book Prefab. Later on, special musical guest Maria Muldaur with that delightfully naughty song that baby boomers love to sing, Midnight at the Oasis. And now here's your host, baby boomer himself, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. According to Wikipedia, which is 100% accurate, baby boomers are people born from 1946 to 1964, during the post-World War II baby boom, hence the name. Boomers were the main generation to serve in Vietnam, to protest U.S. involvement in Vietnam, to use birth control pills, and to protest against the culture of their stoic parents and grandparents who pretty much liked things the way they always were, if you were male and white. Boomers grew up in a time of increasing affluence and widespread government reforms, like the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts. And we genuinely thought the future was so bright we were going to need shades. Not so much. Even that catchphrase didn't hit until 1986, when Timbuk 3 wrote the song of the same name.
Yeah, their one hit.
Modernist architecture, as a movement, was a baby boomer too. It had a bright post-war optimism about the future, the way we would live and the houses we would live in, and the schools we would learn in, and the hospitals we would recover in. And by gosh, there was going to be a brilliantly designed and efficient urban planning system to reduce traffic and pollution. That, plus human boomers working to legislate equal rights, get national health care, keep us out of foreign wars, improve the public schools, well, how hard could it be? Pretty hard. One of those idealistic plans was to create easy-to-assemble, prefabricated, reasonably priced houses that alleviated affordable housing shortages and got more people into the American dream. What's the future of prefab? Am I going to need shades? U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin, and by modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In our continuing space saga, welcome to Episode 2. There is unrest in the Galactic Senate. Several thousand planets have gone over to the dark side and declared it illegal to build modernist, insisting on huge symmetrical structures, on clear-cut lots with Palladian windows, missile silo entries, and vast arrays of gables. Senator Angela Roll, former slave girl, rescued by Queen Hadid in Episode 1, has a critical vote to create a new army of progressive architects. But the evil emperor has other plans, and rumor has it that a third group exists. Those wacky postmodernists. Yes, they're still around, building a new battle cruiser. It's the USS Philip Johnson. It looks like an enormous Chippendale dresser. Uh-oh, there's gonna be trouble. Centuries earlier in 2021, you can count on Senator Angela's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, real estate agent Angela Roll, with her architecture training advising buyers and sellers of modernist homes on everything from appropriate renovation to ripping out Palladian windows. Angela Roll is your special real estate agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL, or call her at 919-995-0550.
Thank you, Tom. With multiple degrees from Canada and Israel, In 1988, Professor Avi Friedman co-founded the Affordable Homes Program at the McGill School of Architecture. He has published extensively in subjects from construction technology to suburban planning and space management. He is a member of the Order of Architects of Quebec, and his work has included conversion of industrial buildings to residential, urban renewal, private residences, and community planning. His most recent book is Prefab Living. Welcome, Avi.
Hello.
When returning podcast guest Allison Arieff was in the 8th grade, she wrote an essay about growing up to be the editor of Time magazine. With an extensive background in art history plus 8 years of ballet, Allison was founding editor of the still much-loved Dwell magazine from 2000 through 2006. Most recently, she was senior editor at City Monitor and the editorial director of urban planning and policy think tank Spur. She's written for California Sunday, the MIT Technology Review, Wired, City Lab, The New York Times, Good, and Sunset magazines. She's now the Director of Communications at Replica. You've heard her on NPR, KQED Forum, The Diane Rehm Show, The Sundance Channel, HGTV, CNN Money, and 99% Invisible, and now on U.S. Modernist Radio. She's also the author of the books Prefab, Trailer Travel, Airstream, and Spa. Welcome back, Allison.
Wow, you went to the Wayback Machine there. Thank you for having me.
Well, if you did it, we got to mention it.
Allison, I understand that you learned a great deal when you were writing the Airstream book about prefabs, and that helped you become one of the leading experts in the country. What did you learn from trailers?
Trailers and prefab houses have an awful lot in common. They are both built in a factory. They both have economies of scale when you produce many of them. They have various unique methods of construction. The Airstream that I edited the book about has what's called a monocoque, almost like a steel frame construction, which is similar to some types of prefab. They also both share a wide public disdain for them, which has been overcome, I think, more for, say, the Airstream trailer, but not always for prefab houses. So lots of similarities there.
Now, Avi, I read that you were influenced by the house your parents built after World War II.
That's correct. I grew up in, it was 350 square feet house.
Oh, my goodness.
And this was the home of my childhood. And when I came to North America to pursue my education, and I saw the large homes, I asked myself, who needs such space?
1,000 square feet?
Why people are designing homes that look like a car wash? I asked myself why people want these granite countertops. And this led me to the design of affordable housing when I found out how dire the crisis here and how come people like myself were unable to buy a home. So this led me to the founding of the Affordable Homes Program at McGill.
Now, what kind of house was your parents' house, the 350 square feet?
You know, I'm a child of immigrants to Israel, and we lived in a fourplex.
Okay.
You know, when my parents arrived to the country, they were fortunate. They started their life in a tent. And they were very fortunate to receive a small house that was a blessing for them. And my parents slept on a pull-out bed in the living room, and my sister and I shared a room, and we were extremely happy. The kitchen was very tiny. But what I found out, that housing is not about space and luxury. Housing is about people. And I recall enjoying so much the moments there. This is how my family was formed. And I believe that what I try to communicate when I work with people is not the spatial advantages and so on, but the amount of relation or the type of relation that can be formed in-house. So this is, again, an element that you can read in the books that I've written.
Now, Allison, take us back. Where did this idea of prefab start?
Okay, so there's probably competing narratives about where it began, but I will go back to Thomas Edison, who was playing around with kind of prefab designs when he wasn't working on his other inventions.
Probably the most well-known start, though, is things like the Sears home catalog, where you could actually order a house and have it delivered. Of course, you had to put it together. If you sort of think of like the IKEA flat pack furniture, I think it's kind of daunting for 99% of the population to think that they might have to build a house from a kit. But there are still people that do that, and that's sort of early 1900s.
Everything showed up on a flatbed train car, didn't it?
Yep. I think people knew how to do more, people had more essential skills back then. They sort of had to oftentimes build their own homes.
And then the next one that I remember is Frank Lloyd Wright and the Usonian homes. Was that the next sort of movement?
Yeah, I mean, you can start to see a bunch of different practitioners putting forth designs. Jean Prouvé in France had a prototype house. A lot of the case study homes at mid-century were initially thought of as things that were going to be produced in quantity later. Unfortunately, that didn't really happen. It's an experiment that people continue to experiment with and try, and it's kind of amazing to reflect on all the different architects that have tried their hand at it over the years.
I would like to add that to Allison justly described the genesis of prefab in the modern era. But just finished research on the subject, I found out that the first prefabricators were the Romans. When the legions moved across the world or around Europe, they took with them prefabricated structures.
Really?
And then when the Brits immigrated to Australia, they had prefabricated homes. And the most kept secret, perhaps, or known secret, I don't know, is that it was a very, very popular dwelling type during the gold rush in San Francisco. 5,000 homes were shipped to San Francisco during the gold rush. So it came all the way from New York.
Wow. And at that time, there was no Panama Canal yet, right?
No,
that's right.
Not that
it
point.
all came mostly by train. So the idea of packaging something and put it on a vehicle of some sort, be it an elephant, a horse, or a train, dates back many centuries. And I believe that we were all influenced by that in later generations.
Now, Allison, what came first, the Airstream trailers or the Hardy Lustron homes?
Gosh, you shouldn't quiz me on dates because it's not my strong suit. I think they were contemporaneous. You know, at one time, there were 38 different companies making trailers in the United States of varying quality, and they kind of winnowed out to the Airstream company and some of the other ones that we have today. I am fascinated by the Lustron homes. Kind of amazed that I'm not amazed that they took off, but it's another thing that I would have loved to take off. But I think what those houses for those listeners who aren't aware, those are sort of metal sheathed houses that look kind of normal until you get up close and see that it's actually made out of a different material. I think so many of the prefab experiments show that people are really used to and kind of wedded to what's considered a normal home. And when you deviate too much from that kind of standard single-family prototype, people just don't get it and aren't really comfortable. You certainly see this with Buckminster Fuller's experiments with a round house, which of course didn't take off. But we see people kind of subverting, the square or rectangular room. But ultimately, people don't want to experiment too much, is what I've noticed over the decades.
Allison, tell our listeners what a Lustron house was, what it was made of, and how you put it together.
It was panels. It was a panelized house. Panelized enameled steel that you sort of put together. It was developed post-World War II in response to the home shortage. Avi, you mentioned all the stuff that was shipped to San Francisco after the earthquake. It's amazing to me that we kind of don't have the ability to do that. I mean, I live in a neighborhood that actually has quite a lot of those earthquake shacks around, and that was over 100 years ago, and they're still standing. Our current government sends FEMA trailers, not quite the same thing. So the Lustron homes were deployed in the Midwest. They were very low maintenance. They were very durable, and they were expected to take off. But as I said, the material, I think, was a little bit too different for people. Also, they were a bit more expensive to reproduce in any sort of quantity than had been originally anticipated. And so that and a series of mismanagement ended up killing that company. You can see some of them still. I've seen a couple in Minneapolis, I believe.
How big was a Lustron home, roughly?
Well, the Lustron homes, as well as, to Avi's point, just about every home in the United States before, say, the 60s, 70s, you're not going to see much that's more than 1,000 square feet for sort of a middle-class family. I am super obsessed with this list that the National Association of Home Builders has of the kind of dream house / model home that they put together every year. The first one that they built in the 60s was 1,500 square feet, and it has continued to increase up to a peak of over, I think, 12,000 square feet.
Oh,
in the mid-2000s. 12,000. Because it has really essential things like gift wrapping rooms and all those ridiculous
Everyone
things.
needs that.
Everybody needs to live in an apartment store.
Yeah, a sustainable house for the future. We have culturally continued to inflate the size of single-family homes, even as the size of the nuclear family has decreased over the years.
Now, Avi, what are some of the benefits of prefab? Why would people want to invest in a house that was prefab?
Well, you can find a period in history where prefab in North America were very popular. And in fact, the success of that period can explain the need for investment. If you take the Sears homes that were built in the 20s and the 30s, this was, in my opinion, a revolution that unfortunately did not last. As you know, Sears homes, the Sears factory ended their operation in the early 1940s and unfortunately could not survive another 5 years to experience the building boom that followed the Second World War.
If only.
But the advantage of prefab homes at the time and today was first time. It takes much shorter to put together a house. You bring panels or modules from a factory and you put them on a foundation. The other one is quality. Despite the fact that stigma suggests that prefab homes are not so good, I, in my research, find that they are better built than conventional homes because naturally they are being constructed in enclosed spaces, in a plant. And then there is a choice. You can easily make alteration and choices when you build a home in a factory. In other words, you are able to select from a menu, catalog, an element and have them delivered right to the plant in order to be installed. Now, something that is a problem in our opinion, and this is still the challenge, unsolved challenge, it is cost. What I find in my research is that at least in Canada, prefab homes do not offer economic advantage. In other words, the economy of scales, which can lead to potential saving, does not exist. Meaning that if you go to a factory, you will see that is conventional construction in a plant. In other words, all the homes are different from one another. There is no repetition, unlike the car industry, for example. So time, choices, quality are the main advantages.
Allison, when you were with Dwell, there was a lot of buzz about prefab, and particularly two architects, Michelle Kaufman and Rocio Romero. Soon, the magazine told us, their houses would be everywhere. What happened?
Oh, yes. Well, we have a lot to answer for that period, but a lot of things happened, most notably the housing recession, which put a huge kink in everyone's grand expansion plans. I want to pick up a little bit on Avi's comment about economies of scale.
Sure.
What I found, because I started a whole program while I was at Dwell, really like a housing company, so we could produce our own prefab homes for sale. You don't have economies of scale without standardization. What we found, particularly in the Dwell home market, is that everybody wanted customization, right? So, here's your basic Rocio Romero home, but I'd also like a roof deck and a balcony off the side. And, oh, by the way, I live on a 45-degree sloped hill in San Francisco. So the more variables that you put into the equation, the more you lose all the economies of scale that we were talking about before. the reason why we can mass produce cars and sell whatever the affordable car du jour is, a Honda Accord, Honda Civic, is because there's a pretty limited amount of customization you can do in that car. So if you think about prefab housing as kind of like the same automation that goes into the building of a car, but then take in kind of the individual preferences for different countertops, different roof lines, all these different things, the more you customize that, just as you would have a classic tricked out car be way more expensive than a Honda Civic, the harder it is to get there. So that was part of the problem with designs by the likes of Michel and Rocio. Even though they had multiple design offerings, there was still this kind of added layer of customization. Also, it was and continues to be a major labor issue. San Francisco has been battling over whether or not it could build multifamily prefab or not, and the trade unions have fought kind of tooth and nail to keep that from happening because they think it's going to impact their labor pool, even though there's a massive labor shortage in the construction industry right now. But banks are still reticent to lend for prefab housing. That goes back to the stigma that I talked about related to trailers and modular construction. There's still a perception that it's somehow not as good. There are some master plan communities and subdivisions across the United States, for example, that specifically stipulate you cannot build modular prefab houses in their developments. So then as now, there are still just so many obstacles. On top of that, the Great Recession of 2009 really just kicked the knees of kind of all of the prefab outfits that were just seeming like they were going to break through into the market.
So we can blame all the mortgage lenders.
Sure.
And American exceptionalism or individualism. We all want to have something that's uniquely ours, not off the shelf.
I mean, it's quite fascinating. If you visit Levittown today, I think we all probably have some image of Levittown, which was another example of post-war mass housing. None of the houses in Levittown look today like they looked previously. They all have additions. They've added second stories. They've added in-law units, which is not a bad thing. It's just to say that that level of standardization, which has been made fun of or just kind of commented on over the years, is ultimately something that people bristle at, and they want to make their place their own.
Now, Avi, is the attitude towards prefab any different in Canada?
I believe that in both in the United States and Canada, the percentage is 15%. In other words, roughly 15% one form of prefabricated homes. But I believe, and I have to credit Allison for that Dwell made a good contribution to prefab housing, and of course her book. Now, what happened is that what you see in the past few years, how things begin to change. So to answer your question, George, yes, overall, the stigma is still there, but it begins to change. In my opinion, and many times, of course, I love prefabrication, and I ask myself, why didn't it take off? You mentioned lenders. In my opinion, the answer is slightly different. Elon Musk or Steve Jobs did not visit this industry yet. In other words, we are looking to the visionary, the revolutionist, who will come and understand the huge potential to take a home and to make on the Accord, on the Civic of housing, that will be efficient, sustainable, energy efficient, and will be able to be delivered quickly. There are some industries that mushroomed, that grew so fast because there was a champion, a visionary, who came and introduced and completely revolutionized that industry. Unfortunately, prefab housing did not see one. There were many factory owners. There is the Bill Levitt of the world, but he built conventionally. But someone with foresight and energy and money who can come and change and will be able to do what Sears did in the 1920s. Cheap homes, efficient, beautiful, all across the nation did not happen yet. So we are waiting for one yet.
I want to battle you a little bit on that. I think if you look at what IKEA's been doing with Beauclerk or all the prefab construction that happens in Japan and other places in Scandinavia, I don't think it's a question of the technology not being there. I don't think that part has yet to be invented. I think that totally exists. I think all the reasons that I mentioned are what's standing in the way. I mean, you won't find a more recalcitrant industry than the building and construction industry. Like, they do what they do. They don't want to do it any differently. I think that's a cultural problem way more than it's an innovation problem. I mean, you could visit factories worldwide and see housing being spit out that looks great, and that's coming in at a good price point. But we don't have the leadership in this country to make that happen. I mean, I would say all the people that we published in Dwell who were doing this, it wasn't that they lacked great design or innovation. They just faced so many obstacles that I had laid out before. Land costs, financing, labor unions, which I might argue labor unions might in fact be the biggest obstacle, certainly in the United States, to the continuation of prefab. There are some amazing projects that have gone up in the Bay Area, those that have been able to kind of get around the labor problem. David Baker Architects is a great example of that. They've been building all across the Bay Area. So I hesitate to resort to the trope of like, well, the Elon Musks of the world will save us, especially having read quite a lot about Musk's incredible challenges with automation, down to the fact that a robot can't recognize the differences between two screws that a human could have, and they've actually lost millions of dollars in trying to automate a lot of the work in their factories because of that. So I would caution against thinking that that's what we're missing right now. I genuinely don't believe that is what's going to do the transformation.
If I may add, if you were to visit a conventional home building, low-rise construction site today, you will see that we are talking about an industry that is stuck in the 40s. We are still sending a bunch of 2x6s to a muddy construction site to make into a wall.
Sure.
Electricians still drill in each stack to pass a wire, and plumbers are also taking so much time. I believe that the cost of housing can be chopped dramatically. But in order to do that, as things are done in America, in North America, is that we need someone who will be able to package and do the same revolution that we did with the car industry. I believe that in a decade, we will all drive electric cars. There is no doubt about it. But there was a vision that was able to take a vehicle and understand that we are doing something wrong today and be able to convert the entire car industry into electric vehicles. It may still happen in housing, but I don't see much happening. I will be delighted to talk to you about my visit to see the factories in Japan and show you why they made this move forward in a big way and why in Japan prefab housing are considered, if you want, prime product.
There was one visionary, Allison Arieff at Dwell, who tried to put together the Dwell Next House program. Allison, could you tell us a little bit about the story of Nathan Wheeler?
Okay.
It's kind of noir.
Sure. Yeah, it is a little. Okay, so let me back up a little bit so people know who Nathan Wheeler is. So, much to my surprise at Dwell, when we started publishing prefab houses, people started calling me all the time. VC started calling. They wanted to get into prefab housing. Readers were calling all the time saying, hey, I want one of these prefabs you guys are talking about. How do I get one? One day, Nathan Wheeler called, and he's like, I have a lot, and I want to do this. And I, naive as I was at the time, said, great, let's talk. I'm going to start a competition, and if you're game, we'll pick a house for you, and Dwell will help you build this prefab house. Went next door to my boss's office, told her about it. She said, run with it. So I invited, I believe, 14 architects who had been working on prefab modular construction from around the world to submit a design for Nathan and his wife. And because it was going to be their house, they were going to have the final say on which one got selected. This was long enough ago that everyone built actually gorgeous architectural models that we all had sent to my office in San Francisco. And Nathan and his wife came out and they chose one. And of the 14, and I'm sure that you can find this online, I won't run down all the architects that submitted, but it was a great group. And Nathan and his wife chose a house by Resolution for Architecture, which is a firm out of New York. So we signed on to build this house in North Carolina, Pittsboro, North Carolina. I had mentioned difficult sites earlier in this conversation. Nathan and his wife Ingrid had a site that had a road that needed to be dug and had a switchback that you had to do to get up the street. So that was sort of one of our first obstacles. So I will try and speed the story up. Long story short, after much heartache and time and much greater expense, because Dwell was trying to sell advertising against this house, including kitchen advertising. So the house that was supposed to be $200,000 was now already worth over $500,000 because we had an Italian kitchen donated, all these kind of things that complicated the process. The factory that was building it couldn't understand why we wanted all these sort of modern finishes. They kept trying to add sconces to it, and It's a bit of a challenge. On the opening day, the Dwell home, because we advertised it in the magazine, I expected, 20 people were going to come. We were in Pittsboro, North Carolina. It was 110 degrees outside. 500 people came to the opening of the Dwell home. It was shocking. We bought every bottle of water in North Carolina because it was so hot and so crazy, but it was kind of amazing. People were super interested in it. So at the end of that very long, hard day, it became clear that this had just been some kind of business proposition for Nathan. And he was planning to launch his own prefab company and basically take credit for that initial house as his house. That he was going to then move forward with. I will spare everybody all the gory details. I don't think Nathan lives in that house anymore, nor do I think he is in the business.
It's been sold twice since then.
Yes. So it was an incredible learning experience. I think it exposed so many people to prefab. Resolution for Architecture is doing an incredible amount of modular houses, mostly in New York and the Hamptons, and are doing a great job at it. So I think it really helped launch their career. I will just choose not to say too much more.
Well, Dwell's Next House program did a number of prototype homes around the country. It was really like a little case study house series, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that was the idea moving forward. I think the initial case study program was not meant to be a bunch of one-offs, but just as they had discovered how difficult that was to put those houses into production, that was certainly the experience we had. The factory that built the Dwell home wanted nothing to do with us after it. So I think what ended up happening with the Dwell home program is, my vision for it had been, and affordable is definitely a relative term, especially I live in San Francisco where the median home price is over $1 million right now. At the time, we were saying $200,000. We wanted to do this house for $200,000. But the Dwell Home program evolved into something that was whatever you want, we'll do it. If it's 5,000 square feet, if it's 10,000 square feet, if it has 5 levels, 4 levels, whatever. So I think the initial intent that me and my colleagues had at the time changed pretty dramatically over the years. We had initially partnered with Acorn Homes, which is one of the early prefab housing companies.
Like deck houses, yes.
Like deck houses, yeah, that were bought by Empyrean, and that continued to evolve to become a bigger, way more high-end thing that I had ever envisioned. Because, ultimately I think that so much of homes can be built in the factory, and it can be a more efficient and sustainable way of building. But right now, there seems to be success either at the very, very high end or the very, very low end, and those tend to be projects that sort of deserve the bad rap.
Avi, in your new book, Prefab Living, what did you discover were the most successful prefab companies of today?
Well, there are different companies who do different things, but I believe that Living Homes in the States is one of the companies that use the power of choice with computers to create diversity. In other words, this is a really innovative company that does beautiful things. But I would like perhaps to bring you back to something that I attempted to do. Of course, in Canada, sometimes we do not reach the big market. I don't know if you are familiar with a grow home in 1990 with Witold Rybczynski, the author, who taught at McGill at the time. We designed a small home. We really wanted to create the Honda Civic of housing. And we wanted to turn this huge elephant called the home building industry around and have them understand that we don't need these monster homes. We built a demonstration home of the campus of McGill University. It was well publicized. And to our amazement and surprise, 1,000 homes, grow homes, were built in the first year. We stopped counting in our city in 10,000, and it became a fixture of many Canadian cities. Tens of thousands were built. We follow it up with another design called the Next Home, and they all built on campus in a prefabricated manner. On site, many of them built conventionally, but some built in prefabricated way. But the idea was not to have one-off. We say that we wanted to influence the entire industry. We wanted to build them by the tens of thousands, and they were built not identical, different facades, different interior arrangement, and so on. So I believe that that type of spirit to create the small, efficient, diverse, sustainable home, I do not see many factories, many manufacturers going in that direction. What I saw is that many of them cater to large homes, large clients who need large home in rural areas. And this is, again, I hope will change. Again, I don't want to mislead you. There are some catalogs with very small homes, but we created 1,000 square feet home, 2-story, and a basement if people wanted, and they were sold by the tens of thousands.
Allison, affordable housing and housing for the homeless, particularly in large cities like LA and San Francisco, is a major issue and certainly a crisis point for several years. But as you mentioned before, it seems like when prefab solutions are proposed for these, it only adds for the disdain that people have for building housing for the homeless, say.
Yes. I mean, I will speak for the Bay Area where I live, which bends over backwards to keep new housing from being built at every turn. I think anti-prefab just becomes yet another tool in the NIMBY tool shed, just another excuse for why they don't want more housing built. There are some gorgeous modular multifamily projects in the Bay Area. There are many that are mixed-rate housing. Some have luxury housing with affordable units in them, and you can't really tell the difference. There's no reason at all not to keep building these here. The resistance, I would say, in hot markets like the Bay Area isn't solely because of modular. It's a general punitive stance that the homeless somehow don't deserve housing, or who knows who can get at the psychology of it. Housing unaffordability is the greatest contributor to homelessness. I think that there's a very big misunderstanding that somehow all people who are homeless are drug addicts or have mental problems, when in fact, if you look at the data, the higher the housing costs get in a place, the larger the homeless population becomes. And that's certainly what you've seen here. So to my mind, prefab multifamily is the best, quickest, most efficient way to get new housing built. But again, just to reiterate the point that I made before, it's not that we don't have the technology to do so, it's that we don't have the political will to do so. So, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whoever could come and say, I can build a 10-story building in 30 seconds, and it would not solve the obstacles that we have in hot markets like the Bay Area towards building them, because it's not about not having the capability of doing it. It's really that there are just so many obstacles thrown in the way.
Avi, in your book, did you discover at all about prefabs for the moon or for Mars? For instance, some of the work that Bjarke Ingels is doing?
Well, believe it or not, there are people who do that. What changes the next generation of prefab housing is 3D printing. This is a huge movement in technologies that are now sweeping the industries. Some of the most sophisticated factories that I visited are those where there are no person near the assembly line. It's all 2x6s put into a jig, and there are robots nailing them and so on. And what I saw in one of them, I heard a presentation about a researcher, I believe that he works in UCLA, who designed housing for Mars. And the basic idea is that there will be robotic equipment that will take soil, mix it with some liquid that will come from Earth to turn into a mortar kind, and then it will be made by robots into a structure.
Using Martian soil?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
There are people who really work on it, and they are serious that it can be done, and it's all with robots.
The freight costs
nozzles.
of going to Mars are pretty high, Tom, so they can't just truck the dirt in.
I guess not, no.
Yeah.
Well, they have to bring the water, I guess, unless they keep finding sources of water on Mars, so maybe that one won't be a problem soon.
Yeah, so there are people who think about it, and I heard about the ideas to build colonies on the moon and maybe on Mars. People are talking about it, now each time you hear about the mission to Mars, people talk about the next stages, and housing, lodging people is a main preoccupation. And really, there are wonderful visionary ideas. But I trust that we may need to solve first problem on Earth. But yes, ideas do exist.
I sure do hope we solve the problems on Earth before we perfect prefab on Mars. Allison, Avi, thank you so much for joining us. This has been fun.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Maria Muldaur was born in Greenwich Village in New York and started singing in the early 60s with John Sebastian, David Grisman, and Stefan Grossman as the Even Dozen Jug Band, singing and playing the fiddle. She's hung out with the Grateful Dead, and she's recorded 43 albums, with her latest being Let's Get Happy Together with Tuba Skinny. In 2019, the Americana Music Association awarded Maria the Lifetime Achievement Americana Trailblazer Award for her lifelong work of covering the depth and breadth of American roots music. Welcome, Maria.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to hear you.
Maria, a couple of years ago,
Yes.
I was in Jordan, which is a wonderful little country. Everybody loves Jordan. Israel loves Jordan. Syria loves Jordan. The Saudis love Jordan. It's like the little sister that is just adorable.
I love their almonds.
Thank God. Yeah, they figured out how to get along with everybody.
So I'm in Jordan, and I am south of Amman, the capital, but not quite to the Red Sea. I'm in the desert, staying in these little tiny domes, and there are camels strewn about, and it's getting dark. And I strike up your song, Midnight at the Oasis, and the whole place goes crazy. They're just singing along with me, because even in Jordan,
Oh, my goodness.
they know this song.
Wow. I'm not that surprised, only because several years after the album came out, I would say, maybe in 1979, I was speaking with a journalist originally from Boston, but she told me she'd gone on assignment in the Middle East, and much to her surprise, she was interviewing different shahs of different little kingdoms, little mini kingdoms we don't even hear about here, and she said that almost all of them proudly brought out a single of Midnight at the Oasis. They all had it, all these, and so you just never know when you pick a song how far and wide it's going to go and the effect it's going to have on people. So this is like 47 years later, and people all over the world still love it, so I feel very blessed.
When I told people you were coming on the show, a lot of folks mentioned your album, Waitress in the Donut Shop, with such fondness. What was so special about that album?
Well, that was my second album, my second solo album for Warner Brothers Records, and the first one with the big hit came out in 1974. And I just, instead of continuing to look for pop success, I continued what I had started out to do, which was a long and seemingly endless odyssey through various forms of roots music. So I invited my old friend from North Carolina, Doc Watson, and his son Merle to come out to California and record an old Appalachian song called Honey Babe Blues with me. And I got to work with a wonderful band leader and, just one of the jazz greats, Benny Carter, and he hired an all-star jazz big band, and I recorded a few tunes in that genre, continued to work with Dr. John. So it was just an album that, I don't know, had a lot of interesting things on it, and I guess people like that too if they're telling you that now.
And let's fast forward to your new album with Tuba Skinny. Here's Maria with Let's Get Happy Together.
Let's get happy together. You're blue, me too. Let's forget about stormy weather. You lost your baby and I lost mine. I got a nickel and you got a dime. We'll drown our troubles in wine and we'll get happy together. Why should we worry just because they turned us down? We'll show everybody that we're nobody's clown. Now you can dance and I can sing. I got the finger and you got the ring. We'll get the parson to fix this thing and we'll be happy together. You're high, so am I. Let's get happy together. You're blue, me too. Let's forget about stormy weather. You lost your baby and I lost mine. I got a nickel and you've got a dime. We'll drown our troubles in wine and we'll get happy together. Oh, why should we worry just because they turned us down? Come on, baby, let's show 'em that we're nobody's clown. Now you can dance and I can sing. I got the finger and you got the ring. We'll get the parson to fix this thing and we'll be happy together.
Well, you sound very happy.
Yes.
How how can you not be happy after hearing a song like that? I had such fun digging through the archives of time and finding 12 songs from the 20s and 30s because I was very excited about recording with Tuba Skinny, who is a band of young musicians who are very faithfully and authentically and soulfully, I might add, doing material, jazz and blues from the 20s and 30s, and that's kind of where I live musically and spiritually. So it was a wonderful collaboration, and that is a very happy song. I figure it's very timely considering the gloomy year we've just come out of.
Yeah, where are they based?
They're based in New Orleans. They're a New Orleans street band.
Duh.
Yeah, I know.
They play mostly in the street, but over the years they've gotten a lot more recognition over in Europe, where they tend to appreciate this stuff a little more. And they've played a lot of prestigious jazz festivals and so forth over there, but they're mainly based in New Orleans.
You mentioned Doc Watson earlier. I understand that in your career you studied fiddle with his father-in-law, Gaither Carlton. What was that like?
Yes, it was amazing. I was just an 18 or 19-year-old young beatnik gal from New York City, born and raised in New York City, and I had been exposed to and fallen in love with old-timey Appalachian music. I also love bluegrass and all kinds of American roots music, really, but I heard Doc Watson and the family in a concert in New York City, in Greenwich Village, where I was born and raised, and just fell in love with Gaither's fiddle playing and went up to him afterwards and said how much I'd love to learn to play like him. And he said, well, why don't you come on down to Deep Gap, North Carolina, and I'll teach you everything I know. So I had the opportunity to take him up on his kind invitation, and I got to stay with Doc and Rosalie Watson and their two kids, Merle and Nancy. And it was just an amazing experience. I had never been out of the New York tri-state area, New York, Jersey, and Connecticut, and to travel to the Blue Ridge Mountains and take the Blue Ridge Parkway and end up in Deep Gap, North Carolina was just a life-changing experience. And getting to really get to know Doc and his family and sit in on these after supper at night, the other members of the family would sort of walk down a little trail over to Doc's house, and they'd all sit on the porch and sing hymns. It was just an incredible experience for me to have, and I remain good friends with Doc till he passed.
I assume at some point over the years you went to Merle Fest, the annual festival.
I never ended up getting to go to Merle Fest, and I think I deserve to go. Are they still having it? I mean, once COVID is over, I hope.
I assume they will, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll wrangle you an
invite.
invite.
That would be fun. Thank you. I love that.
This next song had no explicit lyrics, but it was considered very racy at the time, and nothing really came along like it until Love to Love You Baby by Donna Summer. And now, as human evolution continues, we have WAP by Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, which we won't spell out.
Thank you.
But it makes Nicki Minaj's Anaconda sound like a church choir. The song was written by David Nichtern, a composer and teacher of Shambhala Buddhism. It's one of the more sensual tunes ever recorded. Well, let's just say there are likely thousands of 47 to 48-year-olds who were conceived to this song. David Nichtern said, I wrote the song before I started working with Maria. The details are a little bit intimate, but let's just say there was a girl, a waterbed, feta cheese and grape leaves, and a Martin 000-18 guitar nearby. In the last 48 years, it's been covered by Hubert Laws, Percy Faith, jazz guitarist Steve Oliver, but even Renee Olstead can't match the original. With this truly legendary hit from 1973, here's Maria with Midnight at the Oasis.
Midnight at the Oasis, send your camel to bed. Shadows painting our faces, traces of romance in our heads. Heaven's holding a half moon, shining just for us. Let's slip off to a sand dune real soon. Kick up a little dust. Come need to speak. I'll be your belly dancer, prancer, and you can be my sheep. I know your daddy's a sultan, a nomad known to all, with 50 girls to attend him. They all send him a jump bags, beck and call. But you won't need no harem, honey, when I'm by your side. And you won't need no camel, no, no, when I take you for a ride. Come on, Cactus is our friend, he'll point out the way. Come on, till the evening ends, till the evening ends. Midnight at the oasis, send your camel to bed. Got shadows painting our faces and traces of romance in our head. Oh, come on, oh, come on. Ooh, yeah.
That's awesome.
Wow. I was such a young little songbird then. It's interesting to hear my voice then to now, you know.
Yeah, well, I was a very young DJ when I played that on the radio all the time.
It still sounds good today. I have
Sure
to say,
does.
I had such a fabulous bunch of musicians in the studio with me. And go figure, a song about a camel, but it's a classic. So I'm very blessed that I ended up recording that.
Maria, when Midnight at the Oasis hit the charts, you were everywhere. You were even on Johnny Carson at the height of his fame, weren't you?
Yes, that was an interesting experience for me. I was on Johnny Carson, I was on Don Kirshner's rock concert, and we did a performance on the Midnight Special, and all the popular music shows of the day. And there's a lot of YouTube videos of my performances floating around out there.
Maria, I have good news. Merle Fest is still going on.
Oh, cool.
The bad news is it was last week. It was.
Oh, well, maybe I'll be one of the first to be invited for next year.
Yeah, it's like the middle of September in Wilkesboro, North Carolina. So folks can go to merlefest.org and find out more about it.
Where can people find your music now and your latest album?
Well, my latest album's called, as you mentioned earlier, Let's Get Happy Together. It's on Stony Plain Records, and it's available all over the internet. I dare not even say record stores because I don't know if there are any record stores anymore.
There
but
are.
You can definitely go to Stony Plain Records online, or Amazon has it. All the places you might possibly want to get a CD or downstream it or online. And I have to say it came out May 7th, and it's got nothing but rave reviews. I'm very, very pleased, and it's very, very gratifying to know that music that was popular over 100 years is still resonating with people today and making people happy. So we hope a lot of people will try to find it and play it for themselves.
Maria, this has been such a blast. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin, and by Modernist Realtor Angela Roll. Okay, Tom, take us to the Oasis.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 8,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino researches guests at midnight from her oasis in the dining room, Guinness in hand. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another Send Your Camel to Bed edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.